12 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 12 defenses I'm ranking this week. The first one, the Buffalo Bills. I know the Bills last week were horrendous on defense versus the Indianapolis Colts, with 41 points allowed in that game for -3 fantasy points. But right here, besides that game this season, they've been the best unit, in my opinion, in fantasy football. The last few weeks here, week 9 at Jacksonville, 9 points allowed, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 10 at the Jets, 17 points allowed, 4 interceptions, and a fumble recovery. And then week 11, like I mentioned, was the down game. But right here, week 12 at the Saints, I think they have a good ball game on Thanksgiving night here, is the Buffalo Bills. The Saints here, they've obviously got Trevor Siemian at starting quarterback, and he's been pretty decent, no doubt about it. Not going to take anything away from him. But I think the Buffalo Bills in this ball game could have a huge game. I think they could find the end zone with a pick six or a return touchdown. And Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram, it's not looking good for both those guys not playing in this game. So that could make Simeon and the Saint offense one-dimensional. And this is where this Buffalo Bills defense tees off and starts making plays. The second defense I got this week, defense is the Chicago Bears. So the Bears playing on Thanksgiving as well at the Detroit Lions. And the Lions give up the 4th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So Jared Goff, he'll be back in the mix. But let's be honest, Jared Goff, he's been horrible the whole season here for this Detroit Lion team. And that's a big reason why they're 0-9-1 on the season. So the last couple games here for the Bears, week 9 at the Steelers, 29 points allowed, 4 sacks, a fumble recovery, and a touchdown. And week 11 versus Baltimore, they had a pretty solid ball game in Soldier Field, 6 sacks and an interception. So I think this one at Detroit, they're going to get 3 or 4 sacks in this one. Couple turnovers caused, and a low-scoring ball game. So I think right here the Bears are one of the better defenses this week, and that's why I got them ranked number 2. Number 3, the New England Patriots. So the Patriots, what a defensive unit they've been this season here. In the last few weeks, they really went off for fantasy owners. Week 9 at Carolina, 6 points allowed, 3 interceptions and a touchdown. Week 10 versus Cleveland, 7 points allowed, 5 sacks in it though. And then week 11 in Atlanta, what a ball game. 4 sacks, 4 interceptions, and a touchdown. So right here, I don't think the number will be that high with the shutout like they had at the Falcons. But right here versus a Tennessee Titan team with tons of injuries, I think this Patriot defense could have another great game this week. I could see him getting 2 or 3 turnovers. I could see them getting to Tannehill 3 or 4 times. And I could see them holding this Tennessee offense down, especially, Derrick Henry, obviously. He's been out the last few weeks, but he's out, obviously, this ball game. A.J. Brown's banged up. We don't know if he's going to play. And Julio Jones is on IR at least another week or 2 here. So they're decimated on offense, is this Tennessee Titan team. And this New England defense is hitting its stride. And this week, I think they have another big week. And I got them in number 3. Number 4, the Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens, I know this season isn't that good on defense, but they've lost a lot of playmakers and good defensive players, including Marcus Peters, who was a great ball hawk for this defense to injury for the season to start the year. But anyway, the last few games here for Baltimore, week 9 versus Minnesota, 31 points allowed. Week 10 at the Miami Dolphins, 16 points allowed, 4 sacks. And week 11 at the Bears, pretty good ball game, 13 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. So right here, week 12 versus the Browns. The Browns, we know their offense, it has a tough time to move the football unless Nick Chubb really has a big ball game. But if they can focus on stopping Chubb early and often in this one on Sunday Night Football with Baltimore, then I think it's going to be easy from there. Obviously, Odell Beckham ain't on the roster. People Jones, he's hurt. And Jarvis Landry, he's not 100% either. So right here, if they can make Baker Mayfield try to beat him in this game, I think this Raven team could have a big fantasy day with a big double-digit number this week. Number 5, the Houston Texans. So the Texans here, their defense, believe it or not, have been pretty solid over the last few weeks. And to add on to it with a great matchup versus the New York Jets that give up the 2nd most fantasy points to defenses on the season. The last couple weeks here for Houston, week 9 in Miami, 17 points allowed, 4 sacks, 2 wintos, 3 fumble recoveries. Week 11 in Tennessee, 13 points allowed, 2 sacks, 4 wintos in that ball game and a fumble recovery. And now right here, Zach Wilson's back in the lineup for the New York Jets. And Zach Wilson, let's be honest, he hasn't been good in the few games he started before he went out with injury on the season. The Jets offense was obviously moving better, in my opinion, with Mike White in the one ball game that Joe Flacco started. So right here, the Texans, they're at home, which is a good thing for them. Zach Wilson on the road is a rookie quarterback, first game back. He's going to be rusty in my opinion, and he's good for a few turnovers in this one and a couple sacks in a low-scoring ball game. So I like the Texans this week at 5. Number 6, the Philadelphia Eagles. So this Eagle unit, they've been playing good football over the last month of the season here, putting up some pretty big ball games. Week 8 at Detroit, 6 points allowed, 6 sacks, a fumble recovery, and a pick 6. Week 9 versus the Chargers, 27 points allowed in that one, so they didn't do anything. Week 10 at Denver, 13 points allowed, a sack, a fumble recovery, touchdown, a block kick in that one. And Week 11 versus the Saints, 29 points allowed, but a lot of it was in garbage time. 2 windows and a fumble recovery touchdown by Slay in that one. So right here in Week 12, they got a great matchup at the New York Giants. I give up the 10th most fantasy points to defenses on the year. And right here, this Eagle team, like I mentioned, they're playing good football. They still got an outside chance here for the division at 5-6 with the Cowboys, 7-3 on the season. So right here, I think they can make a few plays on Daniel Jones. That offense will carble on Monday Night Football with the Giants versus a mediocre Buck defense. So right here, I know the Giants got Tani and Barkley back, but right here, I still think the Eagles can make a few plays in this game and have a top 6 performance this week. Number 7, we're staying in the division, and it's the Dallas Cowboys. So the Cowboys, they're bend but don't break type of defense this season, and they were even getting turnovers as well, which they haven't done for multiple seasons up until this season. But anyway, the last few weeks here for Dallas, Week 9 versus Denver, 30 points allowed, 4 sacks. Week 10 versus the Falcons, 3 points allowed only, 2 sacks, 3 interceptions, including a pick 6 by Trevion Diggs. And then Week 11 at Kansas City, yeah, they had tough time stopping Mahomes and them early in the game, but they still had a decent fantasy day. 19 points allowed to that offense, 3 sacks, an interception, and a fumble recovery. So right here on Thanksgiving, Derek Carr and the Las Vegas Raiders come to town, and the Cowboys, they could have a good game versus Derek Carr, in my opinion. He's got a lack of weapons besides Waller and Josh Jacobs for the most part in this game, and the Raiders give up the 14th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So I think the Cowboys could get them a few times with the sacks, and I think they could get a couple turnovers as well, and I like them this week at number 7. Number 8, the San Francisco 49ers. So the Niners, their defense has been hitting its stride over the last few weeks here, and I know they had a couple decent matchups why they hit it well, but right here they got a tough matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings that give up the second least amount of fantasy points to defenses on the season. But right here, I still think they can make a few plays at San Francisco. They're at home in this one, and Kirk Cousins on the road isn't as good as a quarterback as he is at home. So right here, I think they could get a few sacks, couple turnovers, and it wouldn't surprise me if they did have double-digit fantasy points, even if this game could be a shootout between both teams. So I like San Francisco. And number 8, number 9, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucs go to the Indianapolis Colts this week. They give up the 3rd least amount of fantasy points to defenses on the season. But it was good to see the Bucs bounce back and have a good ball game in Week 11 versus the Giants. Because the last few weeks before that, Week 8 at New Orleans, 30 points allowed, a sack in that one. Week 10 at Washington, 29 points allowed, 5 sacks and a fumble recovery. And then Week 11 versus the Giants, though, 10 points allowed, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, and a fumble recovery. So I think if they could shut Jonathan Taylor down a little, I know you're not going to shut him down 100% the way he's been running this season, and especially the last 2 or 3 weeks. But anyway, if they could get Carson Wentz to have to throw the football 30 or 40 times, if Brady and this Buck offense gets off to a good start, I could see them teeing off on Wentz. I could see them getting a few sacks and turnovers. And I think they could have a decent ball game on the inside track over there in Indianapolis. So I like them in number 9. Number 10, the Miami Dolphins. So the Dolphins have a middle-of-the-pack matchup versus the Carolina Panthers that give up the 9th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So the Dolphins last week, they were a little bit of a disappointment in my opinion. What a great matchup in Week 11 at the Jets, where they only had 17 points allowed, 2 sacks, and a fumble recovery. But Week 9 versus Houston, a big game. 9 points allowed, 5 sacks, 3 intos, a fumble recovery. And Week 10 versus Baltimore, 10 points allowed versus that offense. Very impressive. 4 sacks, an into, and a fumble recovery for a touchdown. So right here, Cam Newton, his second start of the season here for him. And he looked good, I'm not going to lie. But the Panthers still give up the 9th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. And I think Newton can maybe turn it over a couple times, even though I like him as a start as well. But I could see this ball game in to low 20s in this one, the scoring, where Miami can make a few plays and have anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points this week. Number 11, the Seattle Seahawks. So the Seahawks here, it's been a very tough season for them, no doubt about it. Russell Wilson's been back over the last few games, and they lost those 2 games as well since his return. But this week, their defense has a pretty decent matchup at the Washington football team that gives up the 8th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few games here for Seattle, Week 8 versus Jacksonville, 7 points allowed, a sack, a return touchdown, and an interception. Week 10 versus Green Bay, decent ball game versus a good offense, 17 points allowed, a sack, and an into. And then Week 11 versus the Cardinals, they didn't do anything really, 23 points allowed and 2 sacks. But right here, Washington, I think they could get some pressure on Taylor Heineke. Antonio Gibson, he's been up and down this season with his shin injury. But the Washington football team, they're prone to some turnovers. And I think Seattle here, they got to get off the schneid a little in this ball game, especially after losing 5 out of 6. So right here, I think on Monday Night Football, they're going to come out riled up and ready to go. And Pete Carroll, he's got to motivate these guys to do good, and I think they will in this one. It wouldn't surprise me to see Adams and Bobby Wagner have good games on the defensive side of things. And I got them at number 11 in the 12th and final defense. I'm ranking this week's the Los Angeles Chargers. Of the Chargers, they've been up and down this season as a defensive unit. And the last few weeks here, they haven't been good at all here. Week 9 at Philly, 24 points allowed, a sack. Week 10 versus Minnesota, 27 points allowed, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery. And then Week 11 versus Pittsburgh, 37 points allowed and 3 sacks. So right here, the only reason I got them in number 12, I like the matchup at the Denver Broncos. And the Broncos do give the 12th most fantasy points up to defenses. So that's the only reason I got the Chargers ranked right now in this position, because they could get to Teddy Bridgewater, I believe. But Denver's been decent this season with Williams and obviously Melvin Gordon. But I think in this game, the Chargers are going to buckle down. For some reason on the road, their defense plays better than they do at home. And I think in this game, anywhere from 6 to 10 fantasy points is definitely a possible. So that's the top 12 defenses I'm ranking here for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.